Welcome to Your Source TV. I'm Tamara Stuchlak, and with us today is Nicholas Lohr. He is an author, a social scientist. I'm referring to him as a Renaissance man, and he's going to tell us more about his early influences, and he's also founder of the Rockport Institute, and he's created the fields of career coaching and career design. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you.
Let's
Thanks
blast
for having me.
right off into some of your influences, and you've had this really creative, interesting life.
Yeah, so I mean, I have to say, first of all, that my first influence was my mom, because it was absolutely unconditional love. Just to be loved unconditionally is an amazing thing, and it just sets a stage for the rest of your life to feel that you're perfect in a way, that you can just go out into life and
safe
love
and secure.
It's just the root of all of it. It was so
you were
much.
Also a nature boy.
Well, that's true. Pretty much grew up in the woods in the suburbs of Philadelphia and learned a great deal about the world just by observing nature and paying attention and playing in the woods.
So you really feel, as you look back and as you've helped over 15,000 people design their career and their life, that these early influences have really been a foundation for how you've mastered designing your life.
Yeah, because some of them are about paying attention, and that was the woods, and growing up was being able to see things that most people aren't seeing. And now I'll go for a walk with the dog in the woods, and I'll see all the deer, the dog won't. So it's just noticing things about life and people.
And so you were on the New York City Fast Life.
Yeah.
With rock stars of our culture from the 60s and 70s. Tell us about that.
Well, I didn't like the kids that I went to high school with, so I talked my parents into sending me to boarding school. And that wasn't really much better, but I met somebody, a friend who'd grown up in Greenwich Village. So we started hanging out there, and as a wonderful person, a dear friend, like a brother to me, John Sebastian, who was the center of the Love and Spoonful, and just a brilliant songwriter and performer. So,
do you believe in magic?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I do, and I always have. So, I moved there. I was working for the peace movement, for the Student Peace Union, and we were, the peace sign, we brought that to America. We saw a little picture from England where somebody had made it up and used it in a march, and we made it our emblem and popularized it all over the world.
This is around the time of Vietnam?
This is before Vietnam. It was anti-nuclear in those days.
Wow.
So what happened was I ended up being in the middle of the music world, and made a lot of friends and a lot of people that are, pretty well-known musicians. But
Bob Dylan.
I was always scared of Dylan. I pretty much knew everybody except for Dylan. We'd fairly often be in the same place. But he had a rapier wit, and he was, I don't know, I don't think we would have gotten along. The day before he played at Woodstock, we sat down and we in the cafe in the town of Woodstock, 50 miles away, and hung out. But I don't remember anything he said because I was so attracted to his girlfriend that I was just pretty much thinking about that. But there was this amazing guy named Sam Lightnin' Hopkins, and he was one of the great country blues masters.
Out of Texas.
Out of Houston. And
the Texas blues.
It's Texas blues. And when he died, his obituary in the New York Times, he had the biggest single influence of rock and roll guitar of anybody. But he was my first adult friend, really. And it was just amazing being close to this guy. It wasn't that he was a great blues master. It was just he kind of took me in and treated me as a really special person.
And what were you doing at the time? So you were around all these really interesting people at an interesting time in our culture?
Well, it was. And so those were the 60s. So I spent the 60s doing those things. The 70s was back to the land and organic farming. So very early, my first wife and I moved to Maine and started, we bought a 40-acre farm.
So how did it occur to you that organic farming would be something, not just of an interest, but, you're a big thinker and you value important things and to know what's important before it becomes a trend, or you create the trend?
Well, there are some people, and I guess I'm one of them, that it's from paying attention, as I was talking about before, that you see things that are going to happen and are going to make some kind of a difference in the world. In those days, organic gardening was just something that everybody laughed about. And there were maybe 2 organic food stores in the country. And so that's what I did with the 70s. And I was fortunate enough to run into Buckminster Fuller. We were both members of the same boat club in Camden, Maine. So I got to spend a lot more time with him than the great majority of people that knew him. And I had never liked what I did for work. I had done things like I'd be the head of somebody's factory or something or other, and always after a couple of years, I would wind up just being terribly bored. So finally, I'm in Maine, I'm running a company that's doing energy conservation and solar work and all these things that were really interesting.
This is 20 years before it really on anyone's mind.
Exactly.
Yes.
And so also the other thing was there's a big tendency in my life towards sort of transformation and seeing beyond the everyday world. So I had always been, I was studying psychology, but what was wrong with psychology in those days was it was all about what's wrong, what's normal, and how do you fix it. So I was
clinical
interested
versus developmental or positive.
Yeah, or now they call it positive psychology. I mean, I think most of the psychologists back in the days I was there should have committed seppuku that they never noticed the idea of positive psychology, that psychology is very powerfully used with people who were healthy and normal. And now everything's all mixed up with neuroscience, and it's just this huge explosion. Back in those days,
it's been integrated in many fields of study.
Exactly. But I was in a huge quandary about what to do with my life, and wanted to do something that made a big difference, because I'd done the S training, and that was kind of what it was about, was they are the people that came up, the term making a difference was from EST. So I wanted to do something that had a big impact on the world, and that's what led me to do that. And I couldn't think of what to do. So Bucky and I talked about it the first time I met him. We talked about it, and he said, let's talk about it some more. And so I just started to build pieces. I started to design my future. I didn't know I was creating the field of career design as I did it.
Was he creating a Socratic method for you, and that process that is so engaging and just...
Yeah, and well, he would ask me, first, one of the first things he said was, well, what does it take to have a career and a life that's totally fulfilling? And I wasn't really too sure about that. So I started working on that, and I finally came up with the answer that it's everything. And so, what people do is they go out and they try to find something that fits their interests. Well, if you're interested in oriental carpets, what are the things you can do? You can weave them, but you have to be a small girl to do that. You can sell them, import them, study them, clean them.
And this is one of your interests?
No.
Okay.
It's just it just came up. It's just what popped into my mind. But because you're interested in rugs doesn't mean you should do something. So just being interested is one thing, but you want to pick something that fits your natural talents. It's an
And
elegant
this is part of
match
how
with
you
that.
designed
Yeah.
your entire methodology that you've written
Yeah.
about, that's part of your institute.
Yes. So Bucky really got that rolling, and with him, I and him to some extent worked out ways by which this would happen. And so I started Rockport Institute and started looking into the question of how do you get people to the point where they've made a really good choice and it's practical and it ends up being something that you're delighted about.
Did you know of others that were doing this? Because again, you created the industry of
No,
coaching.
there wasn't anybody doing anything like that. There was just that book, What Color's Your Parachute,
Yes.
that would just have you like pick which petal of a flower are you. So that was...
Prior to Myers-Briggs and many
No,
other...
those things all existed, but those are kind of ways to come up with clues. And so the last influence, we're talking about influences, the biggest influence is my wife, Mitra. So for the last almost 30 years, we have been, working together and living together and loving each other. And she has been a total support all that time and has stood for what I've wanted to do and has much more than backed me up. She's been my personal mentor.
Terrific. Well, we're coming to the close of our first segment.
Okay.
And we're going to pick up on the back side of a break and hear more about your career coaching and your institute and your books.
Okay.
So we'll be right back. Welcome back to Your Source TV. With us is Nicholas Lohr. Nicholas, let's jump right back into your
Okay.
inspirations for building career coaching.
Well, what I was thinking was, if I'm going to make a difference in the world, I want to do something I'm really good at. And what I'm good at is getting to the heart of things with people and being a tool maker. So I thought if a lot more people really love their work, they would be free to go and do other things with their life. They'd have more time. If you walk around with a stone in your shoe, it's always going to be painful. So it's really hard to sort of be free of that and, maybe do something in your community or in the country, or to start thinking about things that are going to have something beyond the fact that your shoe hurts. So having a career that doesn't fit is a terrible thing, and it's something that the majority of people are putting up with now. So I just thought it would be a wonderful way to make a difference.
And how do people decide what they want? I mean, you've come up with an entire methodology. You're a social scientist. You've written two books.
Yeah, well, I mean,
You've
what
coached
people...
15,000 people. That's a lot of people.
More than that now. That was a long time ago when that was true. But most people just pick something because it seems like a good idea at the time. That's what most people say. And I think that it's something that just hadn't been developed, that now what's available to people is to work with a coach, or perhaps even yourself, start investigating. And what you're really doing to pick a career that's a great fit is being a detective. So it's like a detective movie.
Neat.
And if you have a coach, it's like one of those things where, Eddie Murphy and somebody else are the two detectives, and you show up at the scene, which is your life, and you start looking for clues, just like they would. Yes?
Yes.
And they go knock on doors and do things. But what you do is perhaps find out more about your natural talents. So we do one program that does timed measures of a whole huge range of innate talents, and that is central to people doing something that's
Do
a
what you're
great
good at.
fit.
Yeah, doing what you're good at.
Do it, well, even
And make
better than that, do what you're great at. Find the place where all these pieces come
nice.
together. Because somebody like a quarterback has all these different talents. If one talent is missing, they're not going to be, you'll never see them on TV.
And so why do people get stuck?
Well, they get stuck for a lot of reasons. Probably the biggest reason is that we're just creatures of a tribe. We don't really think ourselves. We're just given our reality by what tribe we're part of. So right now, the biggest example of that is the Donald Trump people that are, they, whatever they believe, probably 20 years ago, a lot of them didn't believe those things. And the Republican Party was very different. But as the party changes, the people within it change, and they all sort of agree with most of the popular tenets. And it's true of every culture. That was true of the hippies. The hippies all sort of, in a way, looked alike. Long hair, this mustache, all of that. And so when you're not thinking yourself, but you're just getting your reality from your tribe, it's hard to get anywhere. And if you think about college students, that's where it's particularly true. Before you go to college, you probably have very few clues about anything about your future. And in college, probably for most people, whatever they major in isn't going to be a big help. So you kind of get all this information from your friends, and that is not going to get you anywhere. It's going to get you to where it's gotten people so far. So you have to start thinking for yourself and making a commitment to having a great life. And that's really the first and most important thing.
So how do you think most people that you've coached get that spark, or they pop their head out and they start on a path that will find you or another coach, or decide, I've got to do something different?
There's a lot of different ways, but a lot of people just get to the point where they're so fed up they can't stand it at any age, or they've outgrown it, or the world changes, or they marry somebody who's happy with their career, or their best friends are like that. So they see something that guides them to think that maybe it doesn't have to be like this. Maybe I can do something about it. And then they start to investigate, and maybe they find us, or they find something that's going to help.
And so you talk a lot about the power of commitment in designing your life path. So then...
Yeah. When I wrote, my first book, The Pathfinder, I had made 3 promises to Bucky Fuller. One of them involved spreading my work all over the country. And then when I got to that, I thought, well, how do I do that? And I asked a lot of experts, national people in sort of selling stuff. What do I need to do this? And they said, you have to write a book that sells really well and is really great. And I thought, well, that leaves me out. I can't do that. I never liked any thank you notes. I still don't. Writing a thank you note to me is horrible. What do you write after thank you?
Send more.
Yeah, right. I don't know. I think somebody should write a book on different messages, thank you note messages. Or it can be like that movie about the writing love letters for friends. But so you just get started looking at life and your life and what matters to you, and that comes from this promise to have a certain quality of life. You're not going to find it because you want it. Wanting doesn't do anything. Wanting is just stuff going on in your brain. You have nothing to do with it. But inventing a commitment to something that's not easy and fast and certain is something that you literally create yourself. So what you're doing is you're sort of creating yourself newly, being somebody who's saying, I'm going to have it really work. And so that's what we do with people. People come to us for whatever reason, and they just are ready to go for it.
Talk about your Rockport career design method, and what would you want people to know about that?
Yeah,
any
there's kind of
distinctions?
These are things that the distinctions people can use. It's kind of like, just think of the cop movie. So first you're looking for clues. Then what you do is you find a good clue. It could be something idiotically simple like, I like to talk with people all the time. And so there's a clue. So what you're doing is you're working the clue. That doesn't take a lot of work, right? That's a simple one. So you work the clues to the point where you can say, I'm sure that's definitely going to be an important component of what I'm doing. I'm going to talk with a lot of people. Now, obviously, that's a simple one, and a lot of these are very complex and so forth, but that's what you're doing, is building definite pieces of what you're going to do. It's like you're building a structure out of the stuff that you love and that fits you.
So what do you want young people to know about what you've learned and what's important that you want to share with them?
Well, I think the most important thing is that you really are not, you don't have to have this life that most young people think they do now.
Prescribed.
Yeah, where it's just, it's sort of given to you by once again, society. I mean, people are not being proactive. They're just, even people in Silicon Valley, in a way, are just sort of going around and around in this whole thing that's already created. And the really, people like the Google guys and Steve Jobs and so forth were the folks that did what I'm talking about.
Creators.
Who said, yeah, I'm going to create something. And everybody's a creator. So whether
that's when it gets interesting and juicy.
Yeah, that's right. It's very juicy. That's what's juicy.
What do you want people in mid-career to know? What do they really need to know? What's their nugget?
What they need to know is what you can do right now is do something about it. And it's to say, I'm not going to put up with this crap anymore. I'm going to get rocking and rolling with my life. And even though I feel like I'm stuck in this job, I'm not. Because I can do something about it.
And how about seniors? Because, I think people hear career coaching, and I think they might drop themselves out of...
Yeah, I think that what happens is when you're in high school, you think everything's going to be fine when you're in college. And when you're in college, you think, well, okay, when I get through with this and I get a job, then everything's fine. And then it used to be that, well, after I have the job, then I'll retire. Well, things aren't like that anymore. And so you have to make choices all through life. My dad worked for DuPont his whole life.
One company.
Yeah, even in
not
college.
Ever going to happen again.
No, that's not going to happen again. Right. So what I want them to know is that if you haven't been doing something that matters to you and that you're really passionate about, you better get started now, because it used to be in Time magazine, there would be this milestones page, and they would have everybody that died, and they all die at about 90. Even the dictators die at 90 because they're, unless somebody shoots them, because they're doing something, they're up to something.
So why do we not get what we want? And we're coming to a close here.
Okay, we don't get what we want because we're sort of trapped in the same cycle of thoughts. We think we're thinking about stuff, but we're just having the same thoughts going around and around and around and around.
This is profound what you're saying, really.
Well, it's if you're going to do something about your life, you just have to get in there and create it as a project and get busy doing it, whatever it is. And all the people that we hear about who are up to stuff are people who have done that in one way or another.
And what were some challenges that you had in life that really you think you overcame or have been part of your life philosophy now?
Well, I think I sort of interrupted my story about writing the book in the middle, but that's one thing. I just promised I would write the book. And I promised, and Bucky was dead, so I couldn't rescind the promise. So I just did what I had to do because I had promised. And The whole time I wrote it for 3 years, I thought Simon & Schuster will want their money back. And then it ended up being a top 10 bestseller.
What do you think people saw in that book that just was new to them, particularly at the time?
Well, I think it's true now. It still sells super well now. Well, what they see is somebody, it's a very personal book, so they see somebody who's looking at things about their life in a way that they can act on those things, where it's not just thinking about it, but they can do something about it, and it's not confusing or difficult.
Nick, thank you for being with us and thank you for inspiring people to their greatness.
Thank you.
Join us again with Your Source TV.